Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us on our third and final 25 Plus Unplugged podcast episode. It's really good for you to join us. We've got a few guests that are coming in again today. We're going to actually mix things up a little bit. The first two episodes, we've brought Abraham on straight away. Abraham will be featuring a little bit later on, but as I said, to mix it up a little bit, I've got two other guests that I just want to introduce you to firstly. So on my left, we've got David and we've got Jared who are joining me today. So welcome, gentlemen, and thanks for carving out a bit of time to come on the 25 Plus podcast.
Yes, thanks.
Pleasure
This is
to
cool.
be here. Yep.
Yeah. Jared, you've been working on camp all week.
Yeah, I've been working in the kindy division. So we're doing dinosaurs for all the kids. We've got a volcano that erupts and we've got a pterodactyl flying from the ceiling. And
I went into the kindy room last night for a prayer meeting and there was this massive dinosaur, just looked like it was like dead on the floor.
having a sleep.
Having a sleep, of
We normally
course.
cover him with a blanket.
At least he's warm then.
That's right.
Okay. Being cold-blooded and everything, it's
course.
important to keep them
Highly
warm
realistic.
with a blanket. Yeah, and David, have you been at camp since it started, or
Yep, we've been at camp and we've got a booth in the hall, I
Expo
guess.
hall.
Expo hall, okay.
With Adventist Heritage. So
okay?
having a great time getting to meet a whole lot of people and catching up with a whole lot of people that I haven't seen for many
Yeah,
years.
right. Oh, fantastic. So you mentioned Adventist Heritage. So David, you're here representing Adventist Heritage, right?
Yep. So,
Okay.
yeah,
So can you just quickly tell us a little bit about what Adventist, or who Adventist Heritage is, your role, where you're based, and just so we have a bit of a snapshot of that.
so we're Adventist Heritage is based in Cooranbong. Our role is looking after the artefacts of the church. We are also looking after all the documents that go right back to the 1800s. And our other role is to inspire by our heritage and make it come alive for people today. So we preserve, we promote and inspire in what we do.
Preserve, promote and inspire. I like it. And I'm sure we're going to be inspired today as we hear a little bit more from you. But Jared, your role in the conference?
Yes, so I'm a church pastor. I work at Coast Life Church on the Gold Coast. What else do you want to know?
Yeah. And
That's my church. I used to work at Mount Gravatt Church, Brisbane Fijian Church, now at Coast Life. Loving it. Got a great group there.
Okay, fantastic. Fantastic. And so the reason why I've brought these two gentlemen on to sort of dialogue a bit is obviously David working in the Heritage Centre, but Jared, maybe you can just quickly say a little bit about your recent experience in I don't know, dabbling or studying some of our Adventist history. What's been happening in your world?
Back in 2020, I got a phone call out of the blue saying there's this new degree that Andrews Uni and the General Conference is putting together to train up all the lecturers around the world in Ellen White and Adventist history. And Jared, do you want to do it? I'm like, I'm not a lecturer. And they said, oh, well, that's fine. We want to train up young guys here in the SPD to know this stuff so they can teach this stuff one day. And so I said yes. I thought, get to travel the world and it's all for free and have some fun and learn history. I love history, love learning. So I said yes. And so that's how it began.
Yeah, so where did you specifically go?
So I went to the Adventist Uni in the Philippines for 2 stints over 2 years, and then to Andrews Uni in America last year to finish off the degree.
Okay, and you got to see some pretty cool artifacts and visit some pretty cool places.
Yeah, so in the Philippines we got to see some of their history, and then in America at Andrews Uni they've got their Centre for Adventist Research. They've got an underground bunker or a vault. They have everything stored there, so there's heaps of cool stuff to see. And then we went on an Adventist heritage tour to all the first places, I guess, where the Adventist church began.
Yeah.
Saw some of those homes and the places where people met each other, taught the first beliefs and sermons and all of that. Yes.
Yeah. So my hope, gentlemen, with having you both on is that we can have a bit of a discussion about this topic of our heritage, of our pioneers, of Ellen White, of all this type of thing. So clearly it's important to you guys, having dedicated, your career and a lot of your study time toward it. So why do you think it's important for us to have a grasp and have a feel for our Adventist heritage?
I got a great quote that I like to use, and of course now it doesn't pull up when I want it to. It goes along the line of our heritage is the seed that leads towards our future, and so I just think that it's important. Oh, yeah, I've got the quote here. It's the heritage of the past is the seed that brings forth the harvest of the future. And that's made by Wendell Phillips, who was an abolitionist back in the Civil War times.
Right.
And
Right.
it's the same as you go on a trip. You never know where you're going unless you know where you've been. So our story of our Adventist heritage or history is an amazing story. And the 25 plus group, our church was built on young people. They were amazing. You know, Ellen White was 17 when she started working for God. Her husband was 21. Jane Andrews took on the Sabbath when he was 17, and his parents weren't involved in that.
Yeah.
And we are trying to to me, it's important because it gives us direction, gives us a point of reference.
Yeah, would you have anything to add to that, Jared, or yeah?
Yeah, it's just amazing to see, like you said, these first guys, they're so young, they're so passionate. They go, we're just going to study the Bible. We're going to discover Jesus. What's he teaching us? That's what we want to follow. What does it say in the Bible? That's what we want. It doesn't matter all these traditions that have crept into all the denominations over so long. We just want the Bible. We just want Jesus. What can we find here? And I'll share some tomorrow in my talk about just how radical it is, what they were discovering and teaching, and how radical it is today to be an Adventist. We're like, oh, Sabbath, that's a nice thing. It's like, no, Sabbath is crazy when you think about what the other denominations have. Like, they just don't have it. They miss it. It's not there for them. This radical thing of 24 hours with Jesus, that is huge. No one else has it. And then you think about our other beliefs too. It is such a cool picture of Jesus that we have, such a loving, kind, compassionate Jesus. And that's what we see the first Adventists discovering. Maybe we've lost some of that today. We're just like, oh, Adventist, oh, church, oh, that's what we do. But what we do is so radical when we actually understand it. And so to see that in history and bring it to the present, I think that's really exciting.
But I think the other exciting thing for you, and you've just been to the States, is that these people were real. We often think of, we read books and we think these people are way off in the distance and, they're old people, they're this stuff. But standing in front of the graves of some of these people and seeing some of these artefacts going to their homes, they were real people. And, I had the privilege of going to Elmshaven, Ellen White's house in America, and then I went to Battle Creek. And everyone tells the same story that that we hear at Sunnyside, how she was engaged into the community. And she was a real person.
So I'll just butt in there quickly. So you've mentioned Elmshaven, you've mentioned Sunnyside, you've mentioned Battle Creek. Okay. So for people who don't know much about our Adventist heritage, why are those places significant? What happened there? Maybe I'll get Jared. Maybe you can talk about Sunnyside. Like what's Sunnyside? When
Yes, that's the name. She gave her house a name. There was her house down in Currumbong.
Whose house?
Ellen White. Ellen White, yeah.
Okay.
So when she came to Australia, she was fairly old at that stage. They
68.
sent her to Australia, that's where she lived. And there's some cool stories there. My family were friends with her. My family were Adventists before she came to Australia.
Okay.
They were friends with her when she was there at Currumbong, and they just loved hanging out. Like, they would go to her house, she would go to their house, she would bake cookies for the Martin boys when they come across.
Yes.
They planted the orchard out the back of her house. You can read about all this in her diaries and in her books. And then she paid for the Martin boys to go to the Avondale School, which she'd helped start, which was cool. She offered to raise one of the Martin girls in her house because she was having a bit of trouble at home with her parents.
Right.
And so that was just a really nice thing for, an old lady to do for a young girl. Just go, hey, come with me and live with me and I'll help you out. And the Radley family, which married into the Martin family, you can read, they weren't Adventists, and she got dreams from God and she would write them down and send the letters and take them to the Radleys. And eventually they were converted, they became Adventists. And my family was with her when she went up Dora Creek to see the furrow in the field. She had a vision about where to start Avondale Uni, Avondale School, where there was like a big ditch, a trench, a furrow in the field. And so they're with her in that moment when that happens. And so I just grew up hearing these stories about Ellen White and oh, cool, here's this, Adventist lady and this is what she was like. And that's cool. I guess I never really heard the maybe controversial stuff or the negative stuff. Just growing up was like, here's this cool lady who was friends with my family. They were friends with her.
Yeah.
We were chatting off air about the organ that she has in her house there, how it got there. And the story my granddad told me, I presume it's true. The story he told me is that the guy heard that Ellen White wanted an organ. The prophet wants an organ, so where am I going to get an organ? And his wife had recently got an organ, and he was sick of that organ. And so when she was off at the farmers markets one day, he gets his little horse and buggy, and he loads up the organ on it, and she starts walking home, and he's coming out the driveway with the organ on the back, and she's like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" So I'm giving it to the prophet. I'm giving it to Ellen. And so he races off down the road and gives it to her, and now it's in Sunnyside. Now it's in the museum.
Still works.
Yeah. There you go.
Pedal away and play a tune, which a lot of people do, and it's like aerobics.
Yeah, right, right. So Sunnyside is this place in Cooranbong, down sort of near Newcastle. That's where Ellen White lived. That's where your heritage or your family kind of have their roots, Jared.
Yeah.
But then from an Adventist heritage perspective, so people can come down to Sunnyside.
Absolutely.
And what do they do? What can you visit it? Can you tour? What can you tell us about that, David?
We're open every Sabbath afternoon between 3 and 5. We have tour guides. We are open for special appointments for those that are travelling through. We'll go and open it up for you. We've changed Sunnyside, and if the pioneers came in today, it would be just like they lived there.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, do you know what? We've got the one piece of clothing in the whole world of Ellen White, and I haven't found another piece of clothing in the whole world, and we've got it at Sunnyside. It's a dressing gown, and you'd be surprised. Seriously, you'd be surprised. It is colourful. We often think of her sitting there, and we think of her as very staid and not much going on, much joy. Yeah. But she believed in great colours, and her dressing gown is an example of this. And we've got it put away, and we pull it out for people. But when I was at Andrews, I said, "Have you got any clothing?" They said, "No." I said, "No, we have."
Yeah. That's cool. I remember being told a story of her when she was at Sunnyside, because it's freezing cold in winter, right, down in Cooranbong. And she had false teeth. She would take them out, put them in a cup of water, and then they would freeze overnight. And so in the morning, she'd be sitting there by the fire, thawing out her teeth, getting ready to put them back in her mouth. I thought that was interesting.
Wow.
Here's this lady. We often elevate her to
Yes.
some phenomenal level. She's just a human being. She's real. She's got incredible spiritual gifts.
Yes.
But we forget she's a human. She's
Yes.
a person. She's real.
Yeah.
And these stories are interesting. And I find, we're here talking about 25 plus and teenagers, and I found these stories connect.
Yeah.
This superhuman, mega whatever woman that we often talk, that doesn't connect with anyone. I don't know if maybe it did. I don't find that it does today. But these real stories of a real person who had real struggles in real life.
She's just like one of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was amazing. She was a social activist. She really was. She was a woman in a man's world where she really didn't have a shot. So she was gender equality. She was about education. She was about welfare. And one of the great stories I love is that she died at Elmshaven, which is over on the east coast. That's right, west coast of America.
West Coast.
Yep. And they transferred her body halfway across the country to Battle Creek, where she's buried. And 4,000 people turned up to her funeral. And this is back in the days before, you'd just jump on a plane.
Yeah.
And the stories, and I got to speak to 3 of her great-great-grandchildren. They said people went there because she helped them at Elmshaven. She went out and made clothes. She gave them food. Her orchard at Sunnyside was always open for anyone in the community to come from. And the love that she showed to her community. She was known as the buggy woman in Australia. And she'd go out and build fires, and kids would come in and she'd give them cookies. This is not the lady that we sometimes think about, this harsh lady. She was a loving, kind, amazing human.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think when you know this about her and then you start to read some of her stuff, maybe like the testimonies or things like that, which seem to be harsh or like, why on earth would she write that?
Yeah.
But then when you know who she is and you know her heart and you know her huge love for people and you read her writings through that lens, they begin to make more sense, I think. Okay. So it's important to know who she was.
Because we have some of those works like the testimonies, and then even from the Conflict of the Ages series, we have, Desire of Ages and Prophets and Kings. But then we also have these compilations, okay? And can you maybe just share, David, when we say compilations, what does that mean? I don't know if you feel like commenting on how useful they are, or maybe the proper way to use them. Can we talk about that very briefly?
Well, the compilations were obviously people took the writings that she wrote
Yep.
and put them in into an order that they wanted them in.
Yep.
She warns against this. She warns against this because if you look at her writings in entirety, you can get a vision of where she's going. But if you take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, sometimes it doesn't go exactly where she wanted it to go.
Yeah, I think there were two, maybe I'm wrong, compilations during her lifetime, and she helped oversee them because she wrote so much and not all of it was published in a book. And so they would get it from here and there. If you want to know what she teaches about, I don't know, Big Camp. What does Ellen White teach about Big Camp? Well, she didn't write a book on Big Camp, but there'll be comments here or there about evangelism and things like that. And so people would compile it together, which in a day before the internet is great because how would you find it otherwise? Today you can just Google it, you can go to her website, look for different terms and it all pops up. They serve a purpose, I think. In a way, they compile things together, make them easy to find, and they'll always have a reference at the end, but no one ever follows the reference back to the original book, the original magazine article, where you get the full context. Rarely does anyone ever do that, and that's where all the mistakes creep in.
So it seems to me like the compilations are a good starting point because you sort of got all the you got all the topics kind of in one place, but then it's a starting point. So
exactly.
Now you've got your lead, now you've got your reference, go back to the source, read it in context, and away you go from there.
That's what it's meant to be.
Yeah, it's what it's meant to be for. Yeah. So how can we? Okay, so you've spoken about in this sense that the humanness or the to sort of demystify Ellen White a little bit can be helpful because then we can realise that actually she's a bit more relatable, a bit more, we can understand her perspectives and that type of thing. So how do we, for someone watching our podcasts, gents, just in the local church, they haven't gone over to Andrews and studied, how can they access this Ellen White that you're talking about?
Yeah, a few different ways to do it. You can just go to Google, type in Ellen White writings, and you'll find literally everything there. That can kind of be overwhelming because there's so much.
So the website is Ellen
White Writings. If you type the ellenwhitewritings.org, I think it is. If you type that in, there's a website with literally everything she ever wrote. But how do you know where to start? If you go to an Adventist book centre, you can buy the physical books. I think on Amazon too, you can buy physical books. And if I was recommending to someone where to start, because she wrote, 6 foot of books like this. A million books that she wrote and magazine articles and all this stuff. Where do you start? I would say there's a tiny little book called Steps to Christ. That's kind of like the summary of everything she knew about Jesus. She put it into one little book. And that was designed to be handed out to everyone. It's a fantastic little book, all about the love of God. It's, of course, the language is, 100 years old, so some words may not make sense anymore. There are some newer versions that you can find, but you Google it, you'll find it. Steps to Christ, nice and thin and small and quick and simple. Once you've read that, I'd say Desire of Ages. It's a narrative of the life of Jesus.
Written in Australia.
Written in Australia, so that makes it the best. Hey, I think Steps to Christ too, in Australia.
Bit of education.
So best ones are written in Australia. But that book, all about the life of Jesus, I'd say read that. And then, like you said before, the Conflict of the Ages series. So that's the 5 books where she goes through everything in the Bible. She writes it out as a big story, this big narrative exposition, this big story. And a lot of people find that helpful. And again, it's written in old language, but I don't know any other author who's ever done that, from Genesis to Revelation in such depth, gone through telling it as a big story, linking it all together, showing how it's all about Jesus, showing how it's all about the love of God. They're great. I mean, and you'll take a long time to read all of those.
And the other couple other places is our Heritage website's got some 6 short films, soon to be 8. And we've got The Hopeful coming out, and the story of Ellen White. It's Tell the World, but it's been reconfigured for The Hopeful from Jane Andrews' perspective. And there's some really moving parts in that, especially when you realise that Ellen White lost 2 children. So she wasn't overly, you could say, blessed, even though she was a prophet. She had a 6-month-old die and a 14, 15-year-old die. And it goes through that story. And standing in front of those graves at Battle Creek, this woman, it was real. Yeah.
But what else does the Heritage Centre have, David? You got a few sort of samples here.
Got our Heritage Month coming up in October with a whole lot of online programs, and This young man's going to be presenting on one stage. A really interesting topic. You want to share
October
about that?
6th at the Ellen White Symposium, I'll be talking about Ellen White's views on the lake of fire. How did she understand that? As Adventists, we've always said there's no eternal burning hell. But Ellen White makes a comment at the end of a book called The Great Controversy. She says, some will burn for moments and some will burn for days. What does that mean? Do Adventists have a small miniature burning hell? How did she actually understand it?
Yep.
So I'll be presenting her views. I went through literally everything she ever wrote on the topic, thousands and thousands of chapters I went through. And if I can spoil the surprise, she teaches what the Bible teaches, which is that, surprise,
No.
right?
Keep a surprise. Keep a surprise.
Oh, okay, come along. You can watch it. October 6th. You get to see it.
So they can watch that online,
Online,
David?
yep, online.
Yes.
There'll be some more advertising coming out regarding when that is. There's a whole month, and if you come up to see us in the booth, another thing we're doing is encouraging young people to get involved, or kids to get involved in our heritage, and we've got some heritage card, guardian, legacy, hope, advocate, peacekeeper, and they're the attributes of our heritage, or our those that started our church,
Yep.
and how they work. So we asked the kids to come up and find out a little bit about that. Sunnyside tours, we'd like you to come along, and our Adventist Heritage Centre, where you can come and research and come and look at artefacts, or you can actually donate artefacts. So we can, like we've got the Radley organ at
Yes.
Sunnyside, and we know the story now.
So if someone has a fragment of one of Ellen White's clothing, we can add that to the dressing gown, and
Yeah, if you've got that, I'll be surprised, because we asked Centre of Adventist Research and they had nothing.
Wow.
But I think too, you guys collect things from local churches, the history of the local church. Often people have written that down, but it's never stored anywhere. You guys can collate it all, bring it together.
I got given a picture yesterday from a 1940s camp meeting in New Zealand, and also got given a rug that was woven out of coconut husks that took 6 months to make from the Pacific. Cool. So we want to find all that sort of information. But we're interested in people's stories too, because, like I said right at the very beginning, our Adventist history, it's got such good stories. We got the Bugsby story, which you've probably heard about, that's happening at the moment, about the 1923 Citroen that went around Australia. It's a boy's own adventure.
Sure.
Two boys just driving around a car around Australia in 1925. How cool.
Yeah, really cool. Well, gentlemen, can you believe it? Our time is already up. It was great hearing just some of the stories that you've personally encountered. But Jared is going to be joining us tomorrow morning at 10:30. So that'll be Friday morning in our 25 Plus division, and he'll be presenting a workshop on radical Adventism. So this is just a little bit of a teaser of some of the things that you can expect him to maybe unpack in a little bit more detail. So I would encourage you at 10:30 to come down to our 25 Plus division, and you'll be able to hear a lot more about this topic. But yeah, for now, gentlemen, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you around camp.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No worries. All right, well, it's time now for Abraham to come back onto the podcast. It's been great having him ministering to us this week, unpacking this theme of risk it. And so for the last couple of nights, Abraham has been talking about, last night he was talking about this idea of surrender, which I really want to try and unpack in a little bit more detail just now. So Abraham, before we get into the subject matter, I've seen some photos that you were walking around the zoo yesterday.
Yeah, Australia Zoo.
Australia Zoo, and how was that?
It was awesome. Yeah, it's a great zoo. I live right next to our zoo, and it's not great at all. so this was if I lived here, I definitely would have a year's pass. Let's just put it that way.
Was there one of those, did you see some of those iconic Australian animals?
Yeah, the kangaroos, the wallabies, the echidna, the wombats.
Yep.
Last time I was at a zoo, all the wombats were sleeping in their logs, so I didn't get a chance to see them. But this time they were up and about,
Okay.
and it was cool to see them.
And do you have a favourite?
Of the Australian?
Of all these iconic Australian
The
animals?
wombats.
The wombat.
For sure, yeah.
Okay.
At at the boutique, at the little shop, they had a life-size wombat plushie, and I had half of mine to buy it and bring it home, but there wasn't enough room in the suitcase, so I didn't.
Cool. Well, I'm glad that you've been able to get around and see some of the sites here in South Queensland.
Yeah, thank you to your team. That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's good to have a bit of a holiday while you're also busy being on the podcast, being down the tent and all that type of thing. But as I said, we enjoyed listening to your message yesterday, which essentially was on this idea of surrender, right? And so I wonder, for those who might need a bit of refreshing, or for those who may have missed it, can you just share like what your big idea was, and then maybe just really quickly the main sort of narrative that you walked us through? Yeah,
sure. So in a nutshell, our big idea is hope comes from surrender. And we talked about the story of Leah and Jacob, and this longing for love, because we all know, if we're familiar with the story, that Jacob doesn't really love Leah. He never wanted her, but he ends up having to marry her anyways. And the text tells us very explicitly that Jacob hated Leah.
Yeah.
And we see a rivalry between the sisters as well, between Rachel and Leah. And so we find that Leah has these children, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. And if you read the story, it's Genesis 29, you read that she dedicates all three of her sons, the first three, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, to this longing for Jacob. She really wants Jacob to see her, to love her, to be attached to her. And so you find that she names them after these what we called in our text idolatrous longings for love.
Yeah.
Because she couldn't find it in God, right? Or she wasn't searching for it yet in God. She was looking for it in her husband that could never love her.
Yeah.
And the fourth son, however, Judah, this is where we find this surrender. She realizes that this longing will not be fulfilled. And so instead of turning back to that idol of longing for love with Jacob, she surrenders. And she says, well, this time, instead of calling my child after the longing for Jacob, she says, this time I will praise the Lord. And she names Judah praise, essentially, right? And so we talked about yesterday was that hope comes from surrender. When we surrender our longing for everything else and just surrender to Jesus, that's where hope arrives. But then to go further than that, we know that from the line of Judah, Jesus eventually comes.
Yeah.
And that's the hope of the whole world.
Sure.
And so it's that moment of surrender that Leah has. Jesus is not born to Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, these children born to the idolatrous longing of Jacob, but rather he is born to Judah, which is the child surrendered to praise of Yahweh. So in our own lives, we're called to surrender to Jesus, because that's where our personal hope comes from, and the eternal hope comes from as well.
Yeah, but I think, what I appreciated about your message was kind of your diagnosis on the human plight, right?
Yeah.
Being that of idolatry.
Yes.
Okay, like fundamentally idolatry. And I think that's a helpful diagnosis, because yesterday we talked about how there's this tendency for us to reduce our anthropology to being humans as merely intellectual and rational beings, and we set aside emotions and feelings, and we wrestled with that last week. But I think equally we can reduce our anthropology if we define the plight of humanity merely in terms of transgressing God's law, which we sometimes do, but I think framing it in terms of the plight of humanity. Oh yeah, of course but it's more fundamentally, and it's more broadly this posture of idolatry.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Right, because we talked about how we are created from the very get-go. We're created to be spiritual beings.
Yeah.
We are created to worship God.
Yeah.
And that means that when we are in separation from God as a result of sin, our hearts are longing for what our hearts are made for, which is worship.
Yeah.
But the unfortunate reality we find in the world is that there are a million things that want to compete for that worship.
Yeah.
And that's what the idolatry is,
Yeah.
right? And it's not just the breaking of the law. In fact, the breaking of the law, I think, comes from idolatry.
Sure.
Right? Where we're trying to preserve our character, or preserve our prestige, or preserve, even our life in some case, right?
Yeah.
And then we move into murder and adultery and deceit and the breaking of the Sabbath when we're, idolizing the work culture and gaining more and whatever it is, we can turn anything good into an idol and sacrifice to that and worship that. And that's often how transgression of the law comes about.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, there's a sense in which if the plight of humanity is merely not transgressing God's law, right? Like you could theoretically maybe just isolate yourself from humanity and go live in the wilderness somewhere and where you wouldn't have to ever interact with people. And you could probably keep God's law, right? Because you wouldn't be stealing, you wouldn't be murdering, you wouldn't be, because you'd just be by yourself, right?
Yeah.
But
there's a text. Keep talking. There's a quote I gotta find.
Yeah. But why I think it's important to understand our plight in terms of idolatry is that even if you did isolate yourself in the wilderness and cut yourself off from civilization and never, didn't necessarily transgress God's law, there's still this inner issue. There's still this inner posture. That needs to be healed. That needs to be restored. Okay. And so it just reframes. Like once we diagnose the problem, right? Then we can actually properly understand the solution, which is less about behavior modification, although that's important. But more fundamentally, it's about this heart transformation, right? Which is exactly what the prophets talk about. They long for this day when God will put in Israel like a new heart. Right. And Paul talks about, well, this is exactly what's been done by the Holy Spirit, who's come in and taken up residence. So you know what I'm trying to say. Like I'm trying to sort of say that if we can diagnose the problem, it can sort of help us with some of the legalistic undertones that are sometimes present in the way we present the gospel. Really,
100%. And it reminds me of a conversation that I was having yesterday. I hopped over to connect with Pastor Nimrod at the youth tent, and then they were having a conversation with the youth, and we were talking about this very idea, and I brought up the golden rule, right? The golden rule of Jesus. This is Matthew 7. It's in his Beatitudes, and so Matthew chapter 7, he says, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." That's what he says. Now, what's really interesting about that is that idea is actually not a new idea. There are many iterations of that idea in previous religions before Jesus, including Judaism. The difference is that in the previous religions before Jesus, it was always do not do unto others what is harmful to you. So essentially what they're saying, previous religions say just don't hurt others.
Don't hurt people.
Very simple, right? And it doesn't really sound like much of a difference when Jesus comes in and says, well, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? It sounds like the very same thing, but it's actually a very radical, fundamental shift. Because, so for example, right now we're sitting across a table and it's very easy for me not to harm you, right? Like I don't have to really try hard not to harm you. But to do unto you what I would have done unto me, and essentially Jesus is saying to love you the way I want to be loved is totally different. Because that requires an actual positive action versus not harming you just requires me from abstaining from negative actions. And that's the high calling that Jesus calls to, because this is the quote that I was looking for. This is from Mildred Bangs Winkup from A Theology of Love, the Dynamic of Wesleyanism. She writes, love is not perfect, quote unquote, in the sense of having reached its zenith, but in its quality as a dynamic relationship subject to infinite increase.
Okay, can you just read that again?
So love is not perfect in the sense of having reached its zenith or its peak, but in its quality as a dynamic relationship subject to infinite increase. Essentially, what that means, because we were talking about this. In theory, we could come to a point where we no longer harm each other. Right? And in theory, with the power of the Holy Spirit, we can abstain from breaking the commandments, theoretically, right? But that's not enough. Love in perfection is not having reached a point, because if we can reach the point, then that's not what Jesus is calling us to. Jesus is calling us to infinite increase. And so I can theoretically reach a point where I no longer harm you, but I will never run out of opportunities to love you. And that's infinite, right? And that's what really that surrender is about, because it's not about moving into legalism where it says, well, I just need to keep the commandments and not break them. Surrender realizes, okay, the perfection of God and being holy like God is not abstaining from evil, but it is being perfect in love, which means I'm called to infinite love. And I can never reach that period. Like she says, like, it's not a zenith to be reached, a peak to be reached, but rather it's a relationship ongoing of dynamic and infinite increase, where I'm constantly striving for more, and I'll never run out of opportunities to love you. But theoretically, I haven't harmed you yet, hopefully.
Sure.
So right now we've reached that. I've reached that standard. But I will never reach the standard of having loved you perfectly, because there's always more opportunities to do so, right?
Yeah, but the problem is with our, like, you know, that's great and amen, and I love that insight. But the problem is that sin has this tendency to want, it's like an anti-love force. So whilst yes, infinite love and relationship, but the problem is that sin directs us toward ourselves. Or towards idols, right? Which we, of course, can make ourselves our own idols. And so we just come back to this same diagnostic that, what's God going to do in light of this design of infinite love? What's God going to do to fix this? Right? How's God going to fix this idolatrous creation that's come about? Right?
That's exactly it, right? Because, you know, the antithesis to love is selfishness. It's self-centeredness. And that's where all sin comes from. And that's where all idolatry comes from. It's from this focus on the self, where it says, I want to pursue my goals and my ambitions and whatever I want above all other things. But the way of God, and so we talk about the infinite increase, and what God is really trying to diagnose in us is that, no, that's our natural state. It's sinfulness, selfishness. We can't reach that love. But when we surrender, that's what the Holy Spirit does in us, is it begins to address that selfishness so that our idols are toppled and we keep moving in the direction of infinite love, right? And that's what we were talking about yesterday, which is the call for us, because we will never be satisfied with our idols. They're not meant to satisfy. They can't actually fulfill the longing in our hearts, but Jesus can. So when we surrender to that, that's what begins to shift towards love. That's what begins to shift away from selfishness and move us into the hope that we desperately long for.
So and that was going to sort of be my next question. You've partially answered it, but so how does Jesus fix this idolatry problem? So, like, why does Jesus have to be born of why does Jesus have to become incarnate to live a life and then to die on a cross and to resurrect from the dead and to ascend in? Like, why does this Jesus thing have to happen, and how does that fix this idolatry problem? And I know this is probably maybe getting a bit theological and technical now, but I'm just curious, like, if we can.
For sure. Why? It's because, again, like, if we understand that the calling to perfection is not abstaining from sin, it is infinite love, then we realize that, well, I can actually never reach that on my own, right? Even if I theoretically could reach, if you even want to call it sinlessness in terms of abstaining from breaking of the law, you can never reach perfection in terms of always having been perfect love. So Jesus has to come because he has to fulfill all of it. He abstains from the harm, he abstains from breaking the covenant, but more importantly, he is the perfect love. And because inherently our hearts are directed towards sinfulness and selfishness, we cannot be the saviors of ourselves, right? It cannot come from within us. So Jesus comes, he incarnates, he takes on our flesh, and he conquers all of it, sin and death and selfishness, and then becomes the only way through which we receive salvation. He doesn't just model it in terms of like, hey, look what I did, you can do it, follow me in that way. He models it in the sense that actually only I could do it. And so you need to come to me to receive it, because you can't do it on your own. Right?
It's this highly Trinitarian and participationist perspective on salvation, because as you said, Jesus has gone before us and he has done it. And only he can do it.
Only he can do it.
And so now it's our job to, by the power of the Holy Spirit, to be united to him. So that we too can go on this journey toward becoming more like him. But paradoxically, the more we become like him, the more we become like ourselves, like our true selves.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, yeah, and that's what actually Ellen White talks about that too, right? She says the more we become perfected, the more we realize how imperfect we are,
Yeah.
and how desperately we continually and will always need Jesus. I forget the exact quote, but I think it's from the Ministry of Healing, and she talks about that. You know, the more we become perfect, the more we realize how imperfect we are.
Yeah.
Right, and that's the reality, is that we get to join Jesus on this victory, but not because we've earned it or because we've done it. We literally just ride on his coattails,
Yeah.
and get to ride that victory with him. And
Yeah.
he's the one that clears the path and does it all, and
Yeah.
and we're just along for the ride.
Yeah.
Which is the beauty of grace, right?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, my take home, just to summarize that conversation, is that because of this idolatrous condition, the only way out of it is for us to surrender ourselves to God, to the Holy Spirit, for Him to direct us toward who we truly are, to direct us toward Him, as we just spoke about.
Yes.
And then we can come out on the other side like Leah, with this proclamation of praise.
Yes.
And then it's kind of only then when we have this sense of peace, this sense of fulfillment, and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Sort of. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, right? Think about, that just that one moment of surrender for Leah, what that meant. That's where Jesus comes from. That's the line, right? Salvation for the world comes from that moment of surrender.
Yeah.
And think about what God can do with your moment of surrender, right? When we surrender wholeheartedly to God and say, yeah, I'm done with the idolatrous pursuit. I just want to praise the Lord. Like, what salvation can come for people, right? Like, imagine what impact we can make in our world, in our communities, in the world around us, where we say, I'm going to surrender fully to God. How can now salvation come through Jesus, through that surrender?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I love it. So good. So can you give us just a quick, so this is our last podcast for camp.
Yeah.
So we're not going to be able to catch up again like this.
Yeah.
So thinking of tonight and of the next couple of messages to the end of camp, can you just give us, again, a bit of a teaser on what sort of trajectory we're on, without giving too much away?
Okay, yeah. So tonight we'll talk about the battle of understanding. And, our big idea is going to be that understanding is not part of the plan.
Okay.
So we don't need to understand the plan to be a part of it. And then we'll move into a little bit of the story of Abraham on Friday, because today's Thursday, so Friday. We'll into the story of Abraham and Lot, and we'll talk about this call that God has to claim the blessings, to walk over the land and claim it as if it's ours. And then finally on Saturday, we'll end off with the story of Elijah and the Kerith Ravine. And so we'll deal with the question, what happens when where God has called you to dries up?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that sounds really good, Abraham. I'm really excited to lean in and hear some more of those insights. And again, thank you so much for your ministry. We appreciate you having us.
Yeah, it's been an honor to be here with you all.
Yeah. All right, fantastic. Well, thanks, Abraham, and thanks, everyone. It's time to bring my next guest in now. And this next guest, you probably won't see him very often, kind of like up the front on stage. He's a very much a behind the scenes guy, but it was great to be able to have him come and join in the podcast today. And so just as he's preparing himself, just as he's getting himself ready, I just want to just remind everyone that at 7:00 tonight will be our Thursday evening program, where you'll be able to join us with time of worship, and we'll hear Abraham again. And it would be wonderful to have you all down to join us. We're at the far northern end of our Watson Park Big Camp. And so yeah, look forward to catching up with you all then. But just now, we've got our next guest on. So Mr. Neil Poulet, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and I can hear you. Fantastic. We're all wired up and we're all good to go. Hey, it's so good to have Neil on the podcast, because as I said, Neil's kind of very much a behind the scenes guy, but it's good to have him front and center, and good to have him on the podcast just now. So welcome, Neil.
Thank you, brother. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So Neil, tell us a little bit about your involvement in our 25 plus team this year and some of the projects that you've been working on.
It's been amazing. My time on our team, 25 plus. It's Thursday, but I've seen God's hand at work with everything. You know,
Yep.
not only with my role and the podcast and the live streaming, but also it's a collective effort.
Yeah.
You know, everyone playing their part,
Yep.
and then seeing everyone that comes in the evenings. You know, we've had over 300 people turn up, and just not only turn up, but they actually stay as well, and they you know they enjoy each other's company. So for me, that's you know, creating content is one thing,
Yep.
and doing a podcast and the live stream is another thing, but it's the impact
Yeah.
that it has on people, not only online, but the people that you meet. So that's been the biggest blessing for me, being on the team.
Yeah. So specifically, your role has been like basically all the equipment and all the setup and everything for the behind the scenes guy for this podcast, right? And then with the live streaming, and then with some of the reels and the shorts and all that type of tech, video, multimedia kind of stuff. That's basically been. I mean, it's been you, Neil, but you've had a few other helpers with you too.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's like I said, it's a collective effort. You know, it's myself, even brother Adrian, that's behind the camera right now, even with the live streaming, and also, you know, with this space, it's about discipleship. You know, you can mentor and discipleship the younger generation. You know, the ones that are that want to step up into the space and to be used, and that's especially the young ones. You know, so sometimes at church, when they come to church, they don't feel like they belong, but to give them something to do and be involved in, I can see that it makes a massive impact on them. And so, like I said, the content is one thing, but it's how you connect with those around you, and to make an impact not only with the in-house church, but also online church. You know, and that's the two congregations that we have now. Is you know, in-house and online. And when I do the online things, it's trying, when I'm at the back and I experience the spiritual blessing that I'm seeing being there, I want to capture that and show and send that to the guys online, so that they can feel it, and then instead of watching it, they can come and actually be involved and be part of the community. And when I see that, I've seen that in some of the churches that I've been involved in, like the growth that they've had, and it's a blessing. And this is a space that I'm very passionate in. It's a space that they risk it, like the church. Like when a church takes someone on board, or someone that creates content or digital evangelist, you know, they're risking it because it's something that our church are sometimes not open to, because they don't know. They don't know what they don't know what they don't know. You know, so from my perspective, is actually creating it and showing them that this is the potential that it can have, that it can reach. You know, the Great Commission, that's to all the world. You know, and when Jesus was here, they physically had to walk. But what a blessing to live at this time when we don't have to physically be there. But if we create a content like this podcast and we send it out, we don't know who it can touch. And you might not see them, or might not meet them. They're on the other side of the world, but it plants a seed, and then they can start something on their side of the world. So you never know the reach. So that's why I'm so passionate about it.
So how did you get into all this? Like, have you always, since you've started, have you always been doing, you know, tech stuff and podcasting and live streaming, or what's? Can you just tell us a bit of your background, how you started to get into this space?
You know, we serve a God that's got a great sense of humor. You know, and when you come into ministry, like where you start and where you end up is not always at the same place. So, from my perspective of where I started, I wasn't into the tech or any of this videography thing. I started on my phone, and I was just creating videos for my wife and then for my family.
Just on your iPhone?
Yeah, just on my iPhone. Doing slow motion. You know? I like shooting in cinematic look and slow motion. But then after the iPhone, I knew that the content that I wanted to create, the phone couldn't handle it. So I had to purchase proper camera You know, so I got the Sony, the Alpha series, and I started with 1, got 2, and now God's blessed me with 4. So and everything that I have, you know, it's to be used.
Yeah.
You know, and that's my prayers for God to use me in this platform in whatever capacity that He's blessed me with all this equipment. But it's no good just sitting at home.
Yeah.
It's to be used for Him. So
Yeah.
so I think that's why He allows me the equipment that I have, because He knows in my heart is I wanted to use it for Him. I like places like 25 Plus, like churches, like just stories. You know? So that's why I started looking into, and now content creating, repurposing. You know, like when church is live, they may get 100 views, but if you repurpose it, that show can get 500 views. So that week, instead of getting only 100 views, you end up getting 600 views, 1,000 views, 2,000, and then just build momentum.
Yeah, because I mean, our live streams are great for people who are unwell or, you know, unable to get to church, but at the end of the day, that's what we call long form content.
That's correct.
And a lot of people nowadays, with short attention spans, but also who are maybe a bit time poor, don't really have time to sit down and watch like a 1 hour long or 1.5 hour, 2 hour, like whole church service. So what you're sort of saying is you can take that long form content and can you just talk us through the process of how you repurpose it?
So like you're saying, an hour, no one watches an hour, but then you look for all the best points in the sermon.
Like the hooks.
Yeah, the hooks. The hooks. And that's what it is. You create that short form to hook them back into the long form.
When we're short form, like what do we...
Like a reel.
Like how many...
Short.
And how many...
About 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Yeah.
So you find these 30-second hooks, these 30-second gems.
Yeah, gems, and then you repurpose that, and that's how you can reach a person one screen at a time.
Yeah.
You know,
So someone could be on Instagram or on TikTok or on YouTube or Facebook, and they could just be scrolling, and then they get this hook, this 30-second snippet, right? And that's what can introduce them to maybe the more longer term, longer form content.
Yes.
But even introduce you to your church Facebook or your church website, and so it's like you said, it's like a seed.
Yeah. It's a hook. You're trying to hook them on.
Yeah.
And then that gets more views than the long form, obviously. Where you're trying to hook them back into the long form so they can watch everything else that's on your YouTube channel.
So you're sort of getting a lot of exposure, or you're getting a lot of investment from that. Like we're talking like a 30-second short that might take you, let's be generous and say it takes you half an hour. It probably doesn't even take you that long, but let's just say it takes you half an hour to do that. So by investing 30 minutes of your time, you can then, like generally speaking, like in our tent this year, for example, with some of the shorts, like how many views are we how many people have you been able to reach with some of those shorts? Have you looked at the stats recently, or?
One of them was 1,000.
1,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. So you spent 30 minutes of your time, and you've sent that to 1,000 people.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah.
Wow.
And then that's just one.
That's just one. Yeah.
Well, I'll create another probably 8.
Yeah.
One reaching 500, 7, 8.
Yeah.
Another one's about to hit 1,000.
Yeah.
And then, and also a long form as well. You know, like some of the lives we've had.
Yeah.
One of them was 2.4 thousand. You know, so
if you add up, like, the people who have viewed this reel, this long form, if you add all that up, like, what's the stat in terms of the number of people that have visited our Facebook page since camp begun, which was less than a week ago? Like,
well, the views, I think probably 50K.
We're getting around 50.
Yeah,
so
50K.
we've had 50,000 views.
Yeah, I know.
Collectively of all our content.
And and it's only Thursday. We haven't hit the peak yet. We haven't hit Friday or Sabbath.
Yeah.
So
wow.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking like, how can we reach 50,000 people? Like that would take a long time to do through other traditional sort of means.
If we do letterboxing, we won't reach 50,000.
Yeah,
we only reach 100, and probably only 50 look at it, and the rest don't even look. You know.
Yeah.
So that's the power of it. And also, when you create it, it's there forever. You know, once it's uploaded to YouTube, onto Instagram, or to Facebook, it's there the whole time, so that anyone can get to it whenever they want from the other side of the world, and it's there. So that's the power of it. You know, and I think for the church to risk it and use it as a tool of evangelism to reach as many people that we can.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can see why, you know, I'm a numbers guy. So when you start giving me some of those stats, I can see why it's why it inspires you, why it motivates you, because it's
You can see the fruits.
yeah.
You know, and also that's when people go online, that's the only place that that people on the other side of the world can see your church. Like, you know, so that live streaming is just a window that people can see. So if you can put as much as you can through that window, you know, and I've seen churches grow, like, you know, and
So you're working in, like, you're here at Big Camp, but you're also
so I also
you've worked at some local churches as well.
Some local churches
Okay.
as well, you know, and
doing this type of thing.
doing this.
Yeah.
You know, the churches that risked it and given me a chance.
Yeah.
And that's all I needed was a chance, because I've been on this for the past 5 years.
Yeah.
And I've shared it with people, but it's hard for them to see it when they don't see it.
Yeah.
So I had to create it and build it in order for people to actually see it. And I think that might be something that the church sometimes. So,
Yeah. So, you know, I suppose if you're watching, maybe the take home is that, you know, like individually you can risk it by, I mean, it's not hard. We had a workshop on this yesterday, actually, to create some content for yourself just on your phone. And that can be a really powerful way to spread the gospel. But maybe you've got a leadership position in your local church, and maybe as a team, thinking about what risks you can take, maybe there's an opportunity to think about the digital space and maybe start a live stream, or if you do have a live stream, repurpose some of that long form content like we've been talking about. So there's just so many options, isn't there? And there's it's endless options and combinations of things that are possible.
and you just got to start.
Yeah.
You know, once you start, then that's when you build momentum, and that's when the ball's rolling. You know, and if any churches need a hand, just let me know. You know, I'm more than happy to go across and just give them a hand, or just show them the stats that we know. So
yeah, or they can get in contact with with the CSD team. Any of the guys in our conference. I think it's something that we're all happy to go on that discipleship journey with.
Well, that's the prayer anyway.
Yeah,
You know, that's the prayer.
That's the prayer. Yeah, so fantastic, Neil. Well, thanks for joining us, mate. I've just got one more guest to bring on before we run out of time for our episode today. And so I'd like to invite our next guest to come forward and take a seat here. And just as I do that, just a reminder that 7 p.m. tonight is our next event in the 25 plus division, and we'd love to have you come down and join us. We've been having a really good time, a really worshipful experience, a really authentic experience is some of the feedback that we've been getting. And so it'd be great to have you come and join us. But now I'd like to welcome my final guest onto the podcast this afternoon. And so welcome, Lyndon.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and Lyndon, I see you've got an Avondale shirt on.
I do indeed.
So tell me about you're obviously here representing Avondale, and what's your role? What's happening with all that? Yeah.
Look, my role is a schools marketing officer. Basically, I go around to schools in all over Australia.
Yep.
Not just Adventist ones, but anyone who will be interested in Avondale University. People turning up and going, "Hey, this is what we offer."
Okay.
But there is a real purpose and a direction behind what I do when I go to schools. It's not just, hey, we're Avondale, although that's great, but I talk to students about three things: passion, purpose, and profession.
Okay.
And in the Unite and 10 groups, we do some personality profiles which help them understand about who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And what that might mean for them in terms of a purpose, and whether that might lead to a profession.
Okay.
So I refer to them as the three ducks. You get the three ducks lined up.
Right.
Right? And it means that whatever you're doing, if you love, if you're passionate about what you do,
Yep.
then you will find a purpose,
Yep.
and it won't be hard for you to turn up to work. Your three ducks become really important.
Yeah.
But obviously, we do that in a Christian context.
Yeah.
We're talking about, what God has given the students.
Yeah.
What is it that is your spiritual gift,
Yeah.
and how might that lead
Yep.
into a purpose and a profession later on? So, when it comes to your theme this year,
Yeah. Risk it. Yep.
I refer to that really in terms of, in order to risk it, you've got to have some courage.
Yeah.
And having the courage to work out what it is that you are passionate about, what it is that God has given you, to then go, right, I've got to take that next step and find a purpose.
Yep.
And maybe that will lead to a profession. And that takes courage for young people these days.
Sure.
There is so much apathy out there.
Yeah.
This day and age, when I go to schools, it's like, so what are you thinking about doing when you finish school? And there's this, look, I don't know, I haven't really thought about it yet. And there's that kind of apathy.
Sure. Sure.
So many students have, gone through the COVID experience, and it has just left them in this kind of unknown world where they're not prepared to take the risk.
Sure. Yeah.
So getting them to, be courageous.
Yeah.
And go, right, God has given me these things. How can I use them?
And then like our division is specifically targeted for 25 to 35-year-olds. Okay. So like I hear what you're saying, going around the schools, and that's really, really important. But for the people that are tuning into our podcast now, who are presumably in that 25 to 35 age group, what are you seeing in terms of enrolments at Avondale for that demographic? Are people more open to sort of like career changes, or are people open to just studying for the fun of it? Like, what do you sort of see in terms of that demographic of people?
Look, I've been over at the expo hall today, and we've spoken to a couple of students already that are mature age students. So 23, 25, they've got to that point where they're going, I really want to define my purpose in life.
Yeah.
Because where they have been so far is not really where they see themselves going. And so they're wanting to pursue that next level of what am I going to be doing with my life.
Yep.
Look, there's all kinds of age brackets that come to Avondale. Obviously, the younger the group, the year 12s going out into the tertiary land, that's a big portion of the students that we get. But there are so many more people that are still finding their passion, their purpose and profession.
Yeah. And is that easy to do? Like, say, let's just pretend that I'm a 30-year-old and I've been working in whatever industry for the last 10 years, and I'm just, I'm not really feeling that that's my calling or whatever. Is it easy to study as a mature age student? Like, what sort of I know we're speaking very general here, but...
Yeah, look, it's being able to really, because by now they've been out in the workforce, they're used to an income, they've got a certain amount of their life already sort of sorted.
Yeah.
And it takes a bit of a shift for them to be able to go, okay, this is not where I was planning to sort of be. I need to change tack.
Yeah.
And that requires a financial investment.
Yeah.
That requires a change in thinking. That requires sometimes a change in family situations.
Requires a risk.
That's where the courage comes in. You go, well, am I going to take this on or not?
Yeah.
So
But there's like for mature age students who might have their roots down in Brisbane, for example. There are options to study over distance for some units, for some courses. So it doesn't necessarily mean uprooting the family, moving down to Currumbong. There's some flexibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's all kinds of options available.
So what are the main? We'll say this just to wrap up. But what are some of the main courses or the main fields that you can study? Like if I wanted to study to be an astronaut, can I do that at Avondale? Like what are some of the main things you offer?
You know, I hope that one day we'll all be up in the stars. Look, we do a limited number of courses, but we've been doing them for over 100 years. So we
fine-tune them.
We
Yep.
come to the table with a lot of experience, but
Yep.
obviously you've got ministry and theology.
Yep.
You've got teaching, you've got nursing, you've got business.
Mm-hmm.
We offer an arts degree, which has a whole bunch of components in there,
Yep.
counselling,
Yep.
all kinds of little
Yeah.
options in that space.
Yeah.
But we also do outdoor rec as a Cert 4, and you can also turn that into a diploma
Okay.
if you do it for 2 years. But we also have aged care as
Okay.
another addition to that space this year as well.
Okay. Fantastic.
Lifestyle medicine, counselling,
Yep.
chaplaincy, all those kind of
Okay.
things are thrown in amongst that.
Okay.
But certainly we don't offer, like the big unis, a whole 100
Yeah.
degrees.
Yeah.
Having said that, we have a number of students at Avondale who actually study at a university down the road,
Right.
but they live on campus because they want the Avondale experience.
Oh, I see.
So
Okay.
it's like, it works.
Okay. So for people listening in our division who might sort of be in that 25 to 35 age bracket, and maybe it's a career change, or maybe it's just, maybe you've just been traveling and it was one gap year that turned into like a gap decade or something, and you're thinking, getting this sense, as we've been talking this week about risking it, you're getting this sense of further education, of further study. Maybe it's time to reach out to Lyndon and his team, so we can presumably Expo Hall. Like where's some touch points at camp?
Expo Hall, even if you go online,
Yep.
there's a whole bunch of options there in terms of making contact with us.
Yep.
But you can also reach out to me as well.
Excellent.
Come and see me in the Expo Hall. I'll give you some details.
All right. Excellent. There you go, folks. So Lyndon in the Expo Hall for all things Avondale. Well, look, I'm a little bit sorry to say that it's the end of episode 3. It's the end of our podcast series for this week. It's been short and sweet. But look, I've had fun. I hope you've had fun joining in, and watch this space for next year as we dream more about what to make of this. But if you've got any feedback, I invite you to send us maybe a direct message on Facebook or something like that, and we'll take that on board. We'd really appreciate ideas and things that we can look at next year. But look, I suppose thanks for joining, and that's a wrap for 2024 in the 25 Plus